Here is Immortal Moments for explanation. Friends, like videos and subscribes to our channel. Martial Universe Season 10 Part 57 Explanation. So let's start our explanation. The Yuan power in the area suddenly surged as the sword was swung. A green ray of light penetrated through the void at an indescribable speed, and even space itself seemed to have been cut apart in that moment. Careful! The pupils of the Yuan Gate First Elder abruptly shrunk upon seeing this as he sternly cried out. The hairs on the body of the Yuan Gate Elder suddenly stood up as a feeling of intense danger flashed across his heart. Vast and mighty Yuan power instantly wrapped around him like an iron wall. Swoosh! The green light beam descended just as his defense was formed. After which, it swept past. The surging Yuan power and the expression on the face of the Yuan Gate Elder immediately froze. Crack! A faint sound was suddenly transmitted over from the majestic Yuan power defense. After which, countless pairs of eyes were stunned to see cracks rapidly extend on it. In the end, the incomparably tough defense fell apart with a final bang. While this happened, the body of the Yuan Gate Elder inside also popped into bloody mist. HSS. The sound of cold air being inhaled echoed within the area. No one could have expected that a Samsara stage super expert would be killed by Ling Qingshu in a single strike. Swoosh! As the bloody mist rose, Yuan spirit died in black light fled from within it. His sharp and miserable cry resounded across the sky, "You little slut! How dare you destroy my body? I will never let you off! Humph, useless thing!" A cold glint flashed within the eyes of the First Elder. With a wave of his sleeve, the Yuan spirit was kept inside the sleeve. After which, his dark and sinister eyes focused on the long sword-wielding Ling Qingshu below. The latter's eyes were still cold, but a faint paleness had flashed across her face. It was obvious that the powerful attack from earlier had consumed a significant amount of energy. You are indeed worthy of being the most outstanding disciple in the history of Nine Heavens Supreme Purity Palace. It is likely that even your teacher cannot not compare to you. However, do you think that you alone can save Nine Heavens Supreme Purity Palace today? All Yuan Gate disciples, listen up. Watch Nine Heavens Supreme Purity Palace in blood. The First Elder waved his hand in a fit of rage. His voice was filled with brutal murderous intent. Understood. The Yuan Gate disciples let out an earth-shaking shout upon hearing the First Elder's furious cry, while murderous desire filled the sky. Suru clenched her teeth after seeing Yuan Gate's offensive surge over again. She immediately led everyone to block the attack. Junior sister. However, she was stopped by Ling Qingshu. The latter glanced at the flood-like attacks of the Yuan Gate disciples and softly said, "Lead the disciples and retreat. I will cover your backs." Senior Sister Qingshu. Suru was alarmed. Although Ling Qingshu had displayed astonishing strength earlier, Yuan Gate was overwhelming. Moreover, the most formidable Yuan Gate First Elder had yet to take action. How could Ling Qingshu stop all of them alone? Senior Sister, we aren't afraid of death. Allow us to remain behind and share the fate of Nine Heavens Supreme Purity Palace. The surrounding Nine Heavens Supreme Purity Palace disciples hurriedly said. If all of you die, Nine Heavens Supreme Purity Palace will cease to exist. Longsword in hand, Ling Qingshu clenched her other hand and a simple-looking token appeared within it. After which, her cold voice spread, "With my position as the new Palace Master of Nine Heavens Supreme Purity Palace, I order all of you to withdraw immediately. Those who disobey will be expelled from the sect." Senior Sister. Tears began to gather in the eyes of countless Nine Heavens Supreme Purity Palace disciples as they involuntarily knelt down. The sight of this black sea of people was extremely spectacular. Listen to me if you do not wish for my death to be in vain. A crystal tear seemed to fall under the veil, but was quickly scattered by the wind. Subsequently, she lifted her head and slowly headed in the direction of the Yuan Gate's flood-like offensive. The thin sword-wielding figure appeared lonely but determined under the setting sun. Qingshu may die, but the sect will never fall. Qingshu lifted her head. Her cold voice contained an unyielding will as it resounded across the sky. You do have a backbone. The Yuan Gate First Elder laughed in a darkly sinister manner as endless brutality surged in his eyes. Soon after, he waved his hand as an ice-cold voice spread. Kill. Do not allow a single one to remain. Attack. The astonishingly evil aura seemed to cause the entire area to become dark and gloomy. Yuan Gate disciples swept forth like locusts, scarlet-eyed as they wielded the long swords in their hands and charged towards the stunning beauty that was slowly walking towards them. However, this intimidating sight did not hinder her at all. Those beautiful limpid autumn water eyes were clear and cold, completely without unnecessary emotion. The thin gauze that covered her face faintly outlined her absolute beauty, causing even the evil aura that filled the area to pause for a moment. In the face of the flood-like attacks of countless Yuan Gate disciples, that beautiful figure was like a tree that stood before the flood. It seemed weak, but had a suppleness that could not be shaken. Behind her, the 9 Heavens Supreme Purity Palace disciples gazed at the figure of this soul-stirring beauty with red eyes. Some of the female disciples could not help but cry. Green Lotus Thousand Sword Art. Ling Qingzhu finally stopped walking and stood in place as boundless Yuan power unfurled, transforming into countless green light swords in the sky above. With a gentle wave of her jade-like hand, sharp wind noises immediately sounded in the area. Countless light swords seemed to cover the sky as they shot forth, ferociously smashing into the flood-like wave of Yuan Gate disciples. Ah! Miserable shrieks rang out as fresh blood spurted, dyeing the ground red. The flood-like offense of Yuan Gate had been forcibly stopped by a single Ling Qingzhu at this moment. In the sky, the Yuan Gate First Elder observed the heavy losses due to the deaths and injuries of the Yuan Gate disciples with detached eyes. Black light surged within his eyes, but he did not feel any regret at such losses. The entire Yuan Gate was clearly very different from before. Cheng Piyu, Wang Su, Su Li. The three of you will stop her. Be careful, this little one's attacks are somewhat strange. Do not be as useless as Xu Ling. However, being stopped by Ling Qingzhu was after all something that this Yuan Gate First Elder did not wish to see. After pondering in silence for a while, he coldly commanded. Yes. Upon his hearing his words, 3 sinister-looking elders behind responded. Their auras were completely the same as the Xu Ling who had previously been killed by Ling Qingzhu. Evidently, they were also pinnacle experts within Yuan Gate. The 3 moved simultaneously. In the next instant, they appeared in front of the Yuan Gate disciples. With cold snorts, they attacked at the same time. The black light in their eyes surged as Yuan power that covered the sky spread, transforming into layer upon layer of light screens that completely blocked the light swords that were shooting over from all directions. Massacre 9 Heavens Supreme Purity Palace. The trio coldly shouted. The eyes of the Yuan Gate disciples, who had been stopped, immediately turned scarlet red as they responded. They immediately charged towards the 9 Heavens Supreme Purity Palace disciples behind Ling Qingzhu. Upon seeing this, Ling Qingzhu gently gritted her teeth. However, just as she was about to move, the sound of wind was heard, and those 3 Yuan Gate elders had already surrounded her, sealing her movement. Get lost! A clear voice containing slight rage emerged from behind the thin veil. Ling Qingzhu tightly gripped her long sword as ice-cold killing intent flitted across her beautiful eyes. Humph, your many 9 Heavens Supreme Purity Palace elders have all been defeated by us. What does a youngster like you dare to do? The 3 Yuan Gate elders merely sneered. Without giving Ling Qingzhu any time to respond, boundless Yuan power rushed forth as fingers thrust at the air. Yuan power transformed into 3 titanic fingers that powerfully pushed down onto Ling Qingzhu. Bang! The ground within a 10,000 feet radius had already crumbled before the giant fingers landed. Enormous cracks spread outwards like the deep abyss. Ling Qingzhu silently observed these powerful attacks. In the next moment, her slender jade-like hands suddenly came together as resplendent green light surged out from within her body like floodwaters. A huge green lotus swiftly started to take shape above her head. Bang! The 3 giant fingers that seemed to be able to raise the sky heavily landed on the green lotus as berserk Yuan power exploded. Break! A clear shout abruptly emerged, and the green lotus started to revolve. Petals flickered with incomparably sharp and cold light, and even space itself seemed to be sliced apart. The three titanic fingers were shredded to pieces as the green lotus spun. Upon seeing this, the three elders' eyes hardened. Ling Qingzhu's aura was merely at the samsara stage. How could her attacks be so powerful? Swish! While they puzzled over this in their hearts, the green lotus had already ripped the three giant fingers to shreds. Next, it transformed into a flash of green light that headed straight for the trio. Humph! Great Yuan Heaven Slash! When they saw this, the trio's eyes turned cold. Each furiously chopped downwards with one hand. Boundless Yuan power surged, transforming into three giant blades that ripped through space and viciously landed on the green lotus. Bang! The green lotus was unable to bear the destructive forces from the trio and ultimately exploded. However, when the green lotus exploded, a flash of green light abruptly swept out from within it. In the blink of an eye, it had already appeared in front of the three Yuan Gate elders like a ghost. Not good. As green light was reflected in the three elders' eyes, an extremely intense feeling of danger immediately rose in their hearts. Beast-like roars emerged from their throats as the evil black light in their eyes abruptly surged. Swish! The trio attacked in fear and anger, while their hands turned completely pitch black. Devil chi swirled around their hands, which were quick as lightning as they furiously swatted at the green light. Buzz! Green light flickered, revealing an absolutely gorgeous figure. Primal chaos seemed to flit across her autumn water-like eyes at this moment as three sword light swept out with a jerk of her jade-like hand. CHCH. The lovely green light figure brushed past the three Yuan Gate elders, before slowly returning her long sword into its sheath. A line of blood appeared on each of the trio's throats and fresh blood immediately spurted out as their heads flew into the air. Swish! As heads flew, three Yuan spirits flew out in terror, intending to escape. However, Ling Qingzhu was prepared this time. Her eyes turned cold as three incomparably formidable sword strikes pierced the three Yuan spirits, destroying them. In a flash, another three Samsara stage super experts had been defeated at Ling Qingzhu's hands. Moreover, she was even more ruthless this time, and had even destroyed her opponent's Yuan spirits. There was no mercy at all. Ugh! However, when Ling Qingzhu finished off the trio, a soft and muffled groan emerged from under the thin veil. Three black hand-shaped marks had appeared on her shoulder, and bright red blood had dyed the veil red. Ling Qingzhu ignored the blood at the corner of her mouth. She merely slowly lifted her head as she firmly stared at the Yuan Gate First Elder watching her with indifferent eyes from atop the black clouds. Amongst these Yuan Gate experts, he was the only person who gave her a feeling of extreme danger. To have reached this level at such an age, you are likely the only one who deserves the title of the #1 younger generation member in the Eastern Xian region. Compared to you, the so-called three little kings of our Yuan Gate are truly a joke. The Yuan Gate First Elder emotionlessly said. #1 younger generation member. Upon hearing this title, Ling Qingzhu's usually cool and cold eyes finally turned a little absent-minded for a moment as scenes from 3 years ago flashed past in her mind. In that unique devil region, a youngster drenched in blood held a long spear as he proudly faced the three great Yuan Gate sect masters. That battle had shocked the entire Eastern Xian region. You are wrong. I'm afraid I will never have a chance to be #1. I might die here today, however. An absolutely beautiful smile seemed to appear under Ling Qingzhu's veil. I believe that in future, there will similarly be someone who will annihilate your Yuan Gate. Is that so? The Yuan Gate First Elder smiled in a mocking manner. Soon after, he said, "This old one is called Lu Feng. The current you has the qualifications to know this name. Although I know that many young people in the Eastern Xian region have been captivated by you, you have no appeal in this old man's eyes. Do not naively believe that I will show mercy when I attack." Lu Feng finally slowly stepped out from the black clouds. Black light frantically gathered in the depths of his pupils, while devil chi that could fill the sky gathered behind him. It covered the sky, concealing even the sun. Evidently, this Yuan Gate First Elder finally could not help but personally take action. As she felt the astonishing pressure from Lu Feng's body, Ling Qingzhu's slender and lovely figure slightly trembled. Soon after, she looked back at the 9 Heavens Supreme Purity Palace disciples that were slowly being pushed back as they fought. Her jade-like hand slowly clenched tightly as the long sword in her hand was pointed at Lu Feng. What she needed to do now was to stall this Yuan Gate First Elder. Or else, not a single one of the 9 Heavens Supreme Purity Palace disciples would be able to leave. Don't worry, I will not let a single one of your 9 Heavens Supreme Purity Palace disciples escape. As if he knew of Ling Qingzhu's thoughts, Lu Feng faintly smiled. His smile looked exceptionally sinister and brutal. These Yuan Gate elders, who normally looked somewhat respectable and holy, had now become the most cruel demons. Swish! Ling Qingzhu did not reply. Her figure turned into a streak of green as an unrivaled sword glint pierced towards Lu Feng like lightning. Buzz! The edge of her sword swept forth. However, just as it was about to touch Lu Feng, 2 withered fingers covered by black demonic patterns stopped it. Sparks erupted in all directions, but the sharp sword was unable to cause even the smallest injury. Heh! The corners of Lu Feng's mouth lifted, revealing a malicious smile. His other hand formed a tightly clenched fist as layers of demonic patterns appeared on it. An extremely astonishing evil aura spread outwards. Ling Qingzhu's eyes turned ice-cold. She gazed at Lu Feng's violent punch as she gritted her teeth, while a wondrous turbid light rapidly gushed out from the depths of her pupils. Swoosh! The demonic fist pierced through space and arrived. The vast and mighty Yuan power on Ling Qingzhu's longsword suddenly completely disappeared, however, a peculiar luster swept across the edge of the blade. The blade was inclined and ferociously thrust forward. Ch! Lu Feng's 2 fingers were instantly blown away as the longsword flew. Fresh blood spurted out as the sword charged towards his heart without stopping. Bang! However, just as the longsword was about to pierce Lu Feng's heart, the berserk without equal demonic fist had already landed on Ling Qingzhu's body. Devil chi seemed to cover the sky as it swept forth, and even space itself started to shatter. Ugh! A mouthful of fresh blood was vomited from Ling Qingzhu's mouth, while the tip of the sword which had pierced Lu Feng's chest was no longer able to move forward. Sadness flitted across her beautiful eyes as her figure catapulted backwards under the horrified gazes of the 9 Heavens Supreme Purity Palace disciples behind. Blood blossomed, a sight that caused one grief. Senior Sister Qingzhu. The numerous 9 Heavens Supreme Purity Palace disciples that were originally retreating immediately screamed loudly. They stopped retreating and instead desperately charged towards Ling Qingzhu as if they were mad. Humph! Lu Feng glanced at the stumps that remained of his 2 chopped-off fingers, before looking at the sword wound on his chest as an evil look involuntarily flashed within his eyes. With a grasp of his hand, devil chi surged forth, transforming into a 10,000 feet long devil knife. He waved his sleeve and the devil knife pierced through space, quick as lightning as it shot towards the injured Ling Qingzhu. Ling Qingzhu bit down hard on her red lips as she watched the devil knife swiftly approach. Helplessness and despair flashed in those clear eyes hers. In the end, she had been defeated. Was their 9 Heavens Supreme Purity Palace going to disappear like this under the butcher knife of Yuan Gate? Senior Sister. Suru could only watch the beautiful lady, who seemed so fragile and about to wilt in the face of the approaching demonic knife, as tears involuntarily rolled down from her eyes. After which, she howled. Her voice was no longer as clear as it had been before, it was instead filled with matchless despair and sadness. Swish! As her howl echoed in the sky, an incomparably hurried wind sound immediately rang out in the area. Astonished gazes lifted one by one, only to see the uncertain spot in the distance distort as a figure flickered and swept out. Boom! At this moment, the demonic knife fell with a boom. The ground instantly crumbled as giant cracks spread outwards like a spider web. Countless horrified gazes looked towards the dusty area as the eyes of numerous 9 Heavens Supreme Purity Palace disciples instantly dimmed as if they had lost their final hope. Senior Sister. Suru slowly fell to her knees as she blankly stared at that far-off spot. However, in her dazed state, she watched as the dust started to scatter, only to see a completely undamaged area on the broken ground. Moreover, Ling Qingzhu lay there unscathed. That's... A cry of surprise was suddenly heard. Su hastily lifted her head, only to find a thin figure quietly standing some distance in front of Ling Qingshu. The figure did not look big and strong, however, it had completely withstood everything that had been thrown at it. That's... Lin, big brother Lin Dong. Su blankly gazed at the vaguely familiar figure. In the next instant, she suddenly stood up as disbelief and indescribable joy gushed out on her pretty face. Gasps successively sounded out behind her, causing Ling Qingshu to slowly open her tightly shut eyes. She looked at the figure that had unknowingly appeared in front of her as she firmly bit her red lips. Blood flowed down from the corner of her mouth, but she forcibly endured the ripples in her heart and forced her gaze to slowly shift away from the figure's back. In front of her, the figure was silent for quite some time. In the end, he slightly tilted his head back as he looked at the speechless figure behind him with a complicated gaze. Soon after, gentleness stealthily surged in his pitch-black eyes. "Don't worry. With me around, no one can hurt you." Upon hearing this somewhat hoarse and soft voice, even with Ling Qingshu's cool and cold character, an unstoppable feeling of sourness rushed to the tip of her nose at this moment, while water started to gather in her eyes. Demonic aura surged across the sky while the land collapsed. However, that skinny figure simply stood quietly in front. Meanwhile, those monstrous giant waves were all unable to reach him. He turned his body before he uttered those words in a somewhat hoarse voice. After which, he walked and went beside Ling Qingshu, whose head was tilted towards one side, before he looked at her blood-stained veil. Meanwhile, there was still a familiar chillness on the latter's brows. However, this was different from the iciness of Ying Huanhuan. Her chillness contained an inborn pride, and that was also perhaps the reason why she was so outstanding. Ling Qingshu also realized that that young man had walked to her side. Her water-like eyes, which didn't reveal much emotions even when she was about to die, suddenly became a little chaotic. Clenching her hands, she firmly repressed her emotions and stopped herself from looking at that man, who appeared extremely dazzling at this moment. Currently, his appearance was completely different from the miserable appearance he had 3 years ago. While her mind was in a state of chaos, the young man in front of her bent his body, before he directly lifted her off the ground from her waist. The moment she left the ground, Ling Qingshu felt her mind turn blank. A moment later, she recovered her senses before she began to struggle violently. "Stop moving." A somewhat low and deep voice was transmitted over, before Ling Qingshu's delicate figure stiffened. Finally, she lifted her head. Immediately, a youthful face, which looked a lot more tough and mature compared to 3 years ago, was imprinted on her eyes. Currently, the latter's brows were knitted. Moreover, his elegant and sharp demeanor even took Ling Qingshu by surprise. The past 3 years seemed to have washed away his shell and gradually revealed the things that were hidden deep within his bones. Ling Qingshu clenched her teeth gently. However, as she was already wounded, her resistance slowly died down. Meanwhile, only her tightly clenched hands were proof of the ripples stirred in her heart. "Lin, big brother Lin Dong." Su and the many disciples from Nine Heaven's Supreme Purity Palace were startled when they saw that young man, who was walking towards them with Ling Qingshu in his arms. It was a long while later, before Su suddenly came to her senses. Immediately, unconcealable wild joy surged onto her pretty face. "Big brother Lin Dong, it's really you. You have returned to the Eastern Xian region. I knew that you would come back." Lin Dong stopped in front of Su. When he saw the joy on that pretty young lady's face, he involuntarily smiled. The timid and weak young lady from before had finally blossomed. "Well done." Lin Dong gently placed Ling Qingshu down from his embrace. After which, he extended his hand and rubbed Suru's little head. The latter's face reddened immediately. However, this familiar action caused warmth to surface in her heart. Instantly, she felt as though all the fatigue within her body had disappeared. Cough. Beside them, Ling Qingshu suddenly coughed softly. Meanwhile, a bright red color surfaced under her veil. Clearly, Lu Feng's attacks had left her with severe injuries. "Senior Sister Qingshu, are you all right?" Su was greatly startled. The surrounding disciples from Nine Heaven's Supreme Purity Palace also hurriedly surrounded her. Meanwhile, their eyes were all filled with anxiety. Ling Qingzhu shook her head. She looked at her blood-stained seniors and juniors, before she softly said, "Brace yourselves. Powerful foes remain at our doorsteps." After hearing her words, the crowd quickly snapped out of their joyous state. Immediately, all their faces darkened. After all, there was still a huge army from Yuan Gate on the outside, eyeing them with ill intent. Moreover, even Ling Qingzhu was defeated by the first elder of Yuan Gate. Therefore, they had essentially lost their final pillar of support. Leave everything else to my Dao sect. All of you should just focus on protecting her. Lin Dong glanced at Ling Qingzhu. Currently, the latter's eyes had regained some of its usual color. However, she chose to avoid making eye contact with him. In fact, each time they were about to make eye contact, she would turn away immediately. "Big brother Lin Dong, be careful. The first elder of Yuan Gate is extremely powerful." Suru bit her red lips. Although logically speaking, she felt that Lin Dong should think about escaping at a juncture like this, the blind faith she had in Lin Dong twisted the words she wanted to say. "Friend from Dao sect, on behalf of my Nine Heaven's Supreme Purity Palace, Qingzhu would like to thank you for your help today. However, I hope that you will retreat if you are unable to handle them. After all, my Nine Heaven's Supreme Purity Palace will not give in to Yuan Gate even at the cost of our lives." Ling Qingzhu lowered her pretty eyes and softly said. By their side, Suru stuck her tongue out when she heard those words. However, she did not dare to speak up. After all, she had a close relationship with Ling Qingzhu and knew that there was a murky relationship between the two of them. In fact, over the past 3 years since Lin Dong left, she occasionally caught Ling Qingzhu falling into a daze during her training. Moreover, judging by her demeanor, it was clear that she was pining after someone. Those incidents piqued Suru's curiosity. After all, Ling Qingzhu had a cool and aloof character, and she had strong mental fortitude. In fact, there were countless geniuses and monsters in the Eastern Xian region who were pining after her. However, none of them were able to make any headway. At times, Suru even thought that there was no man in this world who could cause this haughty fairy-like senior to behave like an ordinary little girl. As such, when she saw Ling Qingzhu acting in this manner, she felt great shock in her heart. However, what puzzled her was that Ling Qingzhu chose to treat big brother Lin Dong like a stranger, even though there was clearly a relationship between the both of them. Although she had her doubts, Ling Qingzhu clearly enjoyed an extremely high status in Nine Heaven's Supreme Purity Palace. Hence, she did not dare to question her. "Why are you calling me a friend from Dao sect? Don't you know my name?" Lin Dong also lifted his brows when he heard Ling Qingzhu's words. Meanwhile, a trace of fury flashed across his eyes. Was this woman trying to provoke him on purpose? Ling Qingzhu's eyes remained indifferent. She neither lifted her head nor did she reply. Lin Dong snorted furiously after he saw her conduct. Immediately, he turned around and left. However, Ling Qingzhu involuntarily clenched her hand at this moment. Meanwhile, her teeth gently bit her red lips, which were hidden under her veil. However, she stubbornly remained quiet. However, while she remained obstinate, Lin Dong, who had only taken 2 steps, suddenly turned around. Then, he directly flung his palm towards Ling Qingzhu's face, in front of many startled onlookers from Nine Heaven's Supreme Purity Palace. Moreover, it looked as though he was lashing out in anger. Ling Qingzhu's delicate figure shook when she detected the palm wind that was rushing over. She shut her pretty eyes and did not move. Rip. Fingernails, which were accompanied by palm wind, brushed past Ling Qingzhu's face. After which, she suddenly felt a cooling sensation on her face. It turns out that the veil covering her face had been forcefully removed. With the removal of her veil, her seemingly perfect pretty face hidden beneath was also exposed. At that moment, it seemed as though the sky had brightened. "You?" The cooling sensation on her face caused Ling Qingzhu to be startled. She hurriedly opened her eyes before she touched her jade-like face. After which, she was startled when she saw the veil in Lin Dong's hand. Finally, shame and anger appeared on her usually cool and aloof face. Those emotions, which appeared instantly, caused the surrounding 9 Heaven Supreme Purity Palace disciples to be stunned. After all, Ling Qingzhu typically acted in a cool and indifferent manner within the palace, and she seldom revealed such a touching emotion that was comparable to a fairy descending in the mortal world. You look much better than before. There is no need to act like a fairy in front of me. I don't buy it. Lin Dong was absent-minded for a moment because of that dazzlingly and beautiful face. After which, he teased when he saw that shame and anger had surged onto Ling Qingzhu's face. Who cares whether you like it or not? Ling Qingzhu said furiously. However, even though she was angry, her face still looked mesmerizing. Ha ha. Lin Dong laughed out loud. After which, his dark black eyes gradually became cold and stern. He slowly turned his head before he glanced at the experts from Yuan Gate, who were eyeing them with ill intent. Then, he spoke in a faint voice, "Leave everything else to me." Ling Qingzhu looked at his skinny back. Her emotions seemed to have become a lot more chaotic after her veil was snatched by that fellow in an overbearing manner. Then, she bit her lips and suppressed the anger and embarrassment in her heart. Regardless, Lin Dong had showed up at a critical moment, and he had indeed stirred ripples in her calm, unemotional heart. Her relationship with Lin Dong was so complicated that she was troubled by it. Given their characters, there was no way that they could easily forget about the ridiculous deed that they did back then. As such, there would always be a unique spot for each other in their respective hearts. This was something that even the prideful Ling Qingzhu had no choice but to admit. After all, if it was another man who had removed her veil, she would have pierced him with her sword immediately. However, since it was Lin Dong who did so, that act, which could incite her murderous intent, only left her vexed and embarrassed. Ling Qingzhu was undoubtedly a haughty and aloof person. This was clearly demonstrated when they met for the first time many years ago. However, on their first encounter, she was an extremely talented individual from 9 Heaven's Supreme Purity Palace, while Lin Dong was merely a kid from the branch family of a clan in a low-rank empire. Hence, there was a massive gap between them, both in terms of status and strength. Back then, Ling Qingzhu ought to have killed this person, who had taken her virginity, with a stab from her sword. However, Lin Dong's bright and heated eyes stopped her from doing so. At that time, she knew that this seemingly weak young man possessed tenacity and determination that no one could match up to. Moreover, she was aware that she had become the target whom he was actively chasing after. Furthermore, she was also well aware of the tremendous efforts that he had put in. In order to accomplish his goal, since that day onwards, this cub-like young man had begun to run with all his might on a path filled with all sorts of dangers and obstacles. Even though he ended up covered with wounds, he never regretted his decision. Perhaps, at that time, even she did not expect that this once weak young man would actually stand in front of her many years later and use his small body to help her to block the wild storms which even she could not endure. Emotions churned within her heart. Past memories also began to replay within Ling Qingzhu's mind. Finally, a gentle emotion appeared within her clear and bright eyes. After which, a soft voice was slowly transmitted into Lin Dong's ears. Be careful. Amidst tense stares from countless 9 Heaven's Supreme Purity Palace disciples, as well as mocking stares from various Yuan Gate experts, Lin Dong slowly stepped forward. Finally, he slowly stopped on that cracked ground before he lifted his head to look at Lu Feng. Immediately, he parted his lips and formed a smile. However, his smile was filled with endless murderous desire. Who are you? How dare you interfere in my Yuan Gate's matters? Lu Feng stared at Lin Dong in a gloomy and menacing manner, before he asked indifferently. I am here to beat you Yuan Gate dogs. Lin Dong shook his head as he smiled. A cold glint flashed across Lu Feng's eyes. He was just about to speak, when a couple of Yuan Gate elders rushed to his side and said, First Elder, that man seems to be Lin Dong from Dao Sect. Oh. Lu Feng was slightly startled. Then, he carefully sized Lin Dong before he ridiculed, I was still wondering who you are. It turns out that you are actually that homeless stray who was chased out of the Eastern Xian region by our Yuan Gate. Why? Did you secretly return after roaming outside for 3 years? I swore back then that I will obliterate your Yuan Gate. Lin Dong laughed. Just you alone. Lu Feng chuckled. Those 3 old dogs are still alive, am I right? The smile on Lin Dong's face gradually disappeared. Meanwhile, his black eyes stared coldly at Lu Feng as he asked in a faint voice. Brat, are you courting death? An elder of Yuan Gate was outraged as murderous intent flashed across his eyes. In the next instant, he had already rushed forward. Immediately, mighty Yuan power swept across the place, creating an alarming sight. After which, a ruthless all-out punch ripped through the air and mercilessly smashed towards Lin Dong. After throwing his punch forward, even the ground beneath cracked, leaving a huge cracked line. However, up against that ferocious attack from that elder, Lin Dong continued to stare right at Lu Feng. Finally, just as that elder's attack was about to hit his body, he lifted his hand and gently extended it. Bang! That fist, which was powerful enough to destroy a mountain, heavily smashed onto Lin Dong's palm. However, just as everyone was waiting for a frightening assault wave to spread, they were stunned when they realized that Lin Dong's body did not budge at all. Meanwhile, the latter's palm was gently wrapped around that Yuan Gate elder's fist. Moreover, his seemingly long hand appeared like a bottomless pit, as it directly swallowed that incomparably violent attack and directly devoured it. Huh. Upon witnessing this scene, that elder from Yuan Gate had a drastic change in his expression. Meanwhile, uneasiness surged into his heart. However, he was just about to withdraw when Lin Dong's indifferent eyes finally turned and focused on him. Swoosh! Lin Dong took half a step forward. His long hand seemingly penetrated through space as it directly landed on the head of that Yuan Gate elder. After which, a ferocious glint flashed across his black eyes, before a force burst out from his palm. Then, he suddenly pressed his palm downwards. Bang! All of a sudden, that Yuan Gate elder's body began to swell. In the next instant, it was blasted into a bloody fog with a loud bang. After which, a black light flashed before a miserable cry sounded. That elder was just about to flee, when a long hand penetrated the black fog and directly grabbed him. Following which, with no mercy at all, Lin Dong clenched his hand and forcefully shattered his Yuan spirit. Within a couple of breaths' time, an ultimate samsara stage expert was obliterated. Evidently, compared to Ling Qingshu, Lin Dong was several times more ruthless and decisive. Some of the disciples from Nine Heaven's Supreme Purity Palace, who were observing the fight from behind, widened their eyes at this moment. Meanwhile, shock covered their faces. In fact, they stared at that skinny figure as if he was a ghost. After all, Ling Qingshu was able to accomplish such a feat because she had received the inheritance from the palace master. Yet, after missing for 3 years, Lin Dong had actually become this terrifying? Big brother Lin Dong is really powerful. Su Ruo held Ling Qingshu's delicate arm and said. Meanwhile, her pretty face was filled with excitement. With a complicated emotion in her eyes, Ling Qingshu looked at that young man's back, who had easily finished off a samsara stage expert. Following which, she gently sighed in her heart. After so many years, he was finally ahead of her. However, what kind of bitter training must he have gone through in order to reach this level within 3 years? Since the day you left, I have always believed that the Eastern Xian region will no longer catch your eye after you return. Ling Qingshu seemingly gave a gentle smile. That momentary smile caused Su Ruo to be stunned. Is there anyone else? With a smile, Lin Dong patted his hands. After which, he looked at those elders from Yuan Gate before he asked, those 3 old dogs didn't come along, huh? Lu Feng stared menacingly at Lin Dong. Meanwhile, the derision within his eyes had gradually disappeared. After all, even he could not finish off a samsara stage expert so quickly. Therefore, it was clear that the person standing in front of him was no longer the same Dao sect disciple who was once pushed into a corner by them. It seems like you have become much stronger after 3 years. However, with your current strength, I'm afraid that you are a little naive if you believe that you can obliterate our Yuan Gate. Lu Feng said with a dark expression. I know. You bastards have a relationship with the Yimo. However, it doesn't matter. I will erase everything, be it Yuan Gate or the Yimo. Lin Dong said with a faint smile. You know about the Yimo? Lu Feng's eyes shrunk as he said. The reason why your Yuan Gate strength has soared is undoubtedly because the Yimo has been secretly helping you out. Otherwise, you guys can only dream about flattening the Eastern Xian region. Lin Dong ridiculed and shook his head. Then, he stared at Lu Feng and said, even your body is filled with demonic aura. It seems like it is only a matter of time before you are corroded by the demonic aura. Your Yuan Gate is truly a bunch of scoundrels. To think that you guys would actually get involved with the Yimo. Brat, I cannot allow you to live. Great Yuan Sky Cutter. Black light was flickering within Lu Feng's eyes while a frightening murderous aura spread. After which, a monstrous mixture of demonic aura and Yuan power gathered behind him like a surging ocean before he threw his palm forward. Immediately, that monstrous demonic aura transformed into a 10,000 feet large glowing blade that hacked downwards furiously. Lu Feng's attack clearly demonstrated that his strength far surpassed that of the other elders. Immediately, those disciples from Nine Heaven's Supreme Purity Palace were greatly startled. After which, all of them began to feel anxious. The blade glow fell rapidly and even the empty space was split apart. However, Lin Dong continued to wear an indifferent expression. Suddenly, a huge black hole appeared above his head, just as the blade glow was about to land. Kai? The blade glow hacked against the black hole. Following which, a muffled sound appeared, before it was silent once again. The black hole was still rotating, but that blade glow had vanished. It was an extremely mysterious sight. What? Lu Feng was also slightly startled. Soon after, he stared intently at Lin Dong. His voice was dark and deep as he said, is that devouring power? You actually possess the devouring ancestral symbol. Lin Dong smiled indifferently. Instead, he slowly extended his hand, before he aimed at Lu Feng from afar. Finally, he clenched his hand. Swoosh! Lu Feng's expression changed the instant Lin Dong clenched his hand. His body suddenly transformed into many after-images as he quickly retreated. However, right after he moved, his surrounding space became distorted. After which, 4 black holes appeared out of nowhere and surrounded him, before 4 streams of devouring power erupted. Then, a frightening tearing force directly tore the surrounding space into pieces. Bang! The black holes rotated violently. Suddenly, a moan was emitted from within. Soon after, waves of frightening Yuan power erupted, before the prison formed by those black holes was brutally smashed apart. Then, Lu Feng staggered out. Although this black hole distortion technique that Lin Dong had learned from the Devouring Master was very powerful, Lu Feng was no ordinary individual. As such, even though he suffered injuries, he was not killed by Lin Dong in a single strike. You indeed possess the devouring ancestral symbol. At this moment, Lu Feng was finally certain of this fact. After all, there was nothing in this world that could mimic the unique devouring power. Lin Dong smiled, but he did not refute the allegations. Unlike before, there was no longer a need for him to conceal the fact that he owned an ancestral symbol. After all, his formidable strength ensured that he had the ability to protect himself. So what if you possess the devouring ancestral symbol? Do you think that I am afraid of you? Lu Feng had an extremely twisted expression. Meanwhile, the black glow in his eyes grew increasingly intense, while brutal evilness covered his face. Suddenly, he took a step forward before demonic aura rose and transformed into a 10,000 feet large devil figure behind him. Heaven Yuan Devil Fist! A low roar was released from Lu Feng's throat. Currently, it was obvious that he had unleashed his strength to the limit. After all, he detected the rich scent of danger from Lin Dong's body. Lu Feng's body withdrew before he directly leapt into that huge devil figure. Subsequently, 2 scarlet red lights erupted. Then, that devil figure swung its huge hand before a fist, which contained a terrifying force that could destroy the world, swung furiously towards Lin Dong. Bang bang! Before the attack landed on the ground, the frightening fist wind had already shook the space until it became distorted. In fact, the floating island that they were on trembled until it began to collapse. As it was falling rapidly, everyone was greatly startled when they saw this scene. Lin Dong lifted his head. His pupils were reflecting that huge devil fist, which was approaching rapidly. Then, he slowly extended his right arm. Immediately, black light and lightning glow flashed. Soon after, his right arm actually began to liquefy. Meanwhile, black light and lightning arcs continuously danced on his arm, and one could vaguely spot two ancient symbols floating within his liquidized arm. In the past, Lin Dong was only able to use the two ancestral symbols to liquefy his fingers. However, after his strength increased, he was now able to turn his entire arm into that state. Of course, this meant that his attack was far more lethal than before. I will begin to settle the score with Yuan Gate starting from you, old dog. Bang! Lin Dong's feet suddenly stomped on the ground. Then, his body directly transformed into a ray of light. It turns out that he was actually charging head-on towards that devil fist, and he showed no signs of dodging. From the looks of it, he was clearly planning to fight head-on with Lu Feng. Those disciples from Nine Heaven's Supreme Purity Palace quickly pressed their lips tightly together in a startled manner. In fact, even Su Ruo was worried. Instead, only Ling Qingzhu remained visibly calm. However, she had involuntarily clenched her hand. Swoosh! Two frightening rays of light streaked across the sky. In the next moment, they suddenly collided in front of countless pairs of eyes. At this moment, it was as though the entire world had trembled. This episode ends here.